The Bible warns that the borrower is a slave to the lender. And in a world of 50-year mortgages and buying burritos with buy now, pay later schemes, we've made debt our new religion. Adam O'Brien, CEO of the Bitcoin Well, joins me to explain why millennials are actually highly productive slaves with a better UI and how we traded our sovereignty for a credit score. We dive into the brain rot of outsourcing responsibility and why Bitcoin is the only technology that demands personal agency. Adam breaks down why the wisest man on earth was a generational wealth maxi, why critical thinking is the rarest commodity in 2026, and why the path of fiat money always leads to the same destination, zero. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let's dive in. Adam O'Brien, welcome to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Man, finally a show talking about the supreme generation to ever march this planet, the millennials. The millennials got to be, we always talk about the boomers, the Gen Zs like the prodigy, and the millennials are here to pick up the slack on both sides. And so represent, my man, represent.
Maybe a big question. I really wonder what you think about this because I think the credit card culture in the US and Canada is way bigger than in Europe. Do you think the average millennial is actually a sovereign citizen or just a highly productive slave with a better UI?
Dude, a highly productive slave, better UI. I think that millennials especially, we praise debt. We run down debt. That's a business strategy is debt. It's like buy property, lever it up, buy more property. Buy property, get some debt, fix your kitchen, get some more debt, buy a second property, get some more debt. That's the business plan for like freedom in the real estate market. It's I think that we saw the collapse of that in 2008. That's not going away. MSTR's entire value prop was unlocking the captured debt that exists, and we saw Bitcoiners and millennials ape in to the Bitcoiners, millennials, Gen Z, whoever owns MSTR basically owns an equity that owns a pile of debt, and the assets that they buy with that debt. It's like we have a financial system so rooted in debt, which naturally just tips the scales. It just tips the scales in one way. It's crazy to me that we have so much debt and we have quarterly revaluations on the interest. Like every single quarter, your monthly budget can just get turned upside down. It's so volatile. And we're seeing, what we kind of believe to be the end of or at least the transition of the fiat world and the fiat economy. And that's only going to get exasperated and exaggerated as this kind of, we tip closer towards the financial revolution, the great reset, whatever it is you want to call it. Something's brewing. We can feel it. And I think it's catastrophic the way that we look at normalized debt, which is a form of slavery. I mean, the Bible's clear on it. You made a comment earlier. So this concept of debt comes up in the book of Proverbs, but earlier you mentioned this concept of fair and equal weights. That came from the second book in the Bible called Deuteronomy, and it's written by a guy called Moses, and Moses wrote that directly from God. It didn't magically appear. It's like the guy that created the world and the universe spoke to Moses saying, hey, Moses, you got to go and tell everyone how to live. Fair and equal money is like the money section. That's like the original law. And then what's even crazier, even like you drove down the debt. So written in the book of Proverbs, that's written by a guy called Solomon. And Solomon wrote lots of the Proverbs, and God himself called Solomon the wisest man on earth. So it's like, these aren't just like nice fables that we kind of like look at and read and like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Like, no. The Bible, written by the divine spirit of God, called Solomon the wisest person on earth. And he's out here saying, hey, yo, the lender is the borrower is a slave to the lender. And another little tidbit for Bitcoiners, he also says, this is my favorite line from Solomon, a wise man, this is the wisest man saying this, a wise man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Like how based is that? How much of a Bitcoiner, sentiment is that? Like generational wealth mindset coming out of the wisest man on earth, kind of like highlighting the risk. He doesn't say don't take debt, which is interesting. He just highlights the slavery component to debt, which I think is a healthy mindset to walk into debt with.
You've said that holding Bitcoin as a bearer asset demands a little faith. So I wanted to ask you, what is the difference between believing in Bitcoin based on your research, right, and seeing a certain future, but then what is the step to faith? What is the difference between believing and having faith in, taking it off an exchange, being your own bank, having it in self-custody, etc.?
Yeah, it's kind of. Well, yeah, it's kind of this concept of personal agency. Bitcoin, like the revolution of Bitcoin, is not this number go up, right? Haktua coin had number go up for a period of time, right? We've had gold does number go up, oil does number go up. We've got all kinds of number go up assets, and even scarcity isn't the invention of Bitcoin. We've got scarce assets, quasi-scarce assets. We don't have known scarce assets. So that is kind of a little bit of a benefit. But you think about physical assets, let's pick on gold and oil. So gold, you can self-custody gold up to an extent. But if you're going to continually be buying gold, eventually you're going to accumulate such an amount that it's going to be difficult to self-custody. And you're actually incentivized to give it to a custodian because they have better security. You have the option of building out steel fireproof vault in your house with like the security systems and the bodyguards and the lasers and all the crazy things that you do to secure shiny yellow rocks. Or you can pay someone a couple $100 or a couple $1,000 who's already done all that and who pools all those resources together to kind of create that as a value prop. So it's actually like gold gets harder to self-custody the more that you have, and you're actually kind of quasi-forced to centralize that way. Oil is the same thing. I'm not sure you remember during the COVID crash, we saw oil drop to negative $20 a barrel. That meant that holding oil was such a nuisance. The physical custody of oil was so catastrophic that oil companies, whose literal job was to pull oil out of the ground and store it, they were like, nah, I'm not going to do this storage part. We got way too much oil. I can't be bothered with this physical custody. Here, customer, here's this asset that we're going to pay you to take. Like, imagine that world where we see custody of an asset become such a nuisance that we are paying people to take it off of our hands, right? A resource, a natural resource that's allegedly scarce. And we are just paying people. Like, who's going to pay you to take custody of their Bitcoin? But yet we see that happen. And so what's the innovation here, right? What's the real innovation is that Bitcoin, no matter how much you hold, costs the same to self-custody. So you kind of don't have the gold and the oil problem, but you also have institutional grade security built in to the protocol. So you don't even have the like economies of scale problem. Like, oh, it doesn't make sense to secure my $18 of Bitcoin. It's like, well, it costs the same to secure $18 of Bitcoin as it does $18 billion in Bitcoin. It's the same. Like, we've never had that before. It costs way more to secure $18 billion in gold than of Bitcoin or of $18 in gold. Same thing with oil, same thing with diamonds, same thing with like Pokemon cards. Like, the more you get of something physical, the harder and more expensive it is to secure. But with Bitcoin, you have infinite security inside of a finite asset. And that is just like, that's innovation immensely. And so what does that mean? Why isn't everyone self-custodying it? How on earth is custody even a business? And it's strictly because of that fiat mindset and this kind of like personal agency risk calculation. People, for whatever reason, are petrified that they are not responsible enough to own and control their wealth. And I just think that's such a backwards mindset. It's straight programming, brainwashing from the system. It is 100% a fallacy. If you are responsible enough to drive a 5,000 pound piece of metal at earth-shattering speeds down the highway, you can protect some words on a plate of steel. If you are responsible enough to usher in children, or like, think about, like, there's doctors, there's like, we have a lot of personal agency and personal responsibility that we entrust in people. And yet somehow we think collectively we're too dumb to protect wealth. Like, we need to get over this brain rot mindset and understand that custody is a feature, not some nuisance bug that you have to deal with, like it has been for other physical assets.
When it comes to holding Bitcoin securely, peace of mind starts with architecture. OnRamp's multi-institution custody model distributes control access across 3 independent regulated key holders in a 2 of 3 multi-sig quorum. No single point of failure, no pooled or omnibus exposure, just segregated client-titled vaults. You retain full legal ownership while OnRamp coordinates security, compliance, and operational workflows behind the scenes. Multi-institution custody is the foundation for everything that OnRamp builds. Sound infrastructure that distributes counterparty risk and provides fault-tolerant resilience with clear audits and institutional controls. And now OnRamp is piloting flat, predictable pricing to make best-in-class Bitcoin custody and financial products more accessible than ever. Visit onrampbitcoin.com to learn more and sign up with code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. OnRamp, strength in many, simplicity in one. What do you think about the fact that, you know, the American dream, but I think also the Western dream to a degree, right? It used to be all about personal agency and having ownership, right? And now it's really about outsourcing responsibility. It's about credit scores, like we mentioned. What do you think happened? Like, when did people decide to trade their sovereignty for this convenience, and what do we need to get back? Because my idea around this is when more people actually have that agency, when they feel more in control of their life and they want to be more in control of their life, that's when we actually make big steps, right? Because then you have to go out there and do things and create value, etc. And now it is too easy to either rent seek, or, you know, you have these examples of people who work 3 days a week because there's no reward in working 4 days a week, for example, with government benefits and, you know, stuff like that. So if they would work 1 week a day more, they would have to work a whole day to get like I don't know, $20 or 20 euros extra per week or something, right? So they're obviously not doing that. So yeah, what are your thoughts around that? Because I think there's this weird dichotomy between, it's either you're responsible or you're outsourcing everything to random other people that don't know who you are. They are not better than you. They don't know more about the thing that you're outsourcing, right? You can learn about that yourself. So for me, the line feels very thin, but in reality, it's quite wide, I would say.
Yeah, man. I think if I had to, so my gut reaction to like, when did this happen? I would, you know, my gut reaction, like most Bitcoiners, is like 1971. Obviously, this is when it happened. But as I've been thinking about this for, you know, as you were talking there, I think it's actually probably the Industrial Revolution that began this like kind of mass programming for a future world. You look at the Industrial Revolution and pre-Industrial Revolution, this concept of like a global market, or this concept of economies of scale, wasn't really something that we considered. You just did things because it made sense for you and your community. You worked hard, you enjoyed the fruits of your labor, and you lived in a tiny community. And then the Industrial Revolution comes along, and, you know, boom, we get kind of mass programming. We start experiencing, like, you know, state education, you know, state incentives. We start seeing, you know, we start understanding that economies of scale, kind of one person or one group can all of a sudden govern millions of people. I mean, you look at like Russia's a great example of this. Like, Putin governs over 9 time zones. That is like mind-blowing. Like you can't effectively run a country or any organization, any institution across 9. I got a hard enough time with 4 time zones at Bitcoin. Well, I can't imagine. And hey, listen, maybe Putin's a lot smarter than I am. Okay. Fair play. But like 9 is crazy. And I think that this concept of like economies of scale and this concept of mass leadership and kind of like mass organization, mass efficiency, I think that's kind of where it really started. And when you want something en masse, you have to train a society to start thinking en masse. And so, you can't think en masse if your bread comes from your neighbor and your meat comes from your other neighbor and your entertainment comes from across the street and your books come from your local author. Like you just don't think en masse. You're thinking inside of your community. Now, there's benefits to both sides, right? Like you said, fiat's a great invention up to a certain point. Well, probably same goes of the industrial en masse kind of like mindset, this industrial complex mindset of like, yeah, we have technology. You are actually incentivized to burn millions of dollars researching and innovating so we can have the iPhone, so we can have the internet, so we can have the Bitcoin protocol, so we can have encryption protocols. Like, yeah, all this innovation comes from this big, high level en masse mindset. But it also requires us to keep our economies or our individuals, our citizens and our society well trained in this, don't remove personal agency. There's this quote that I like that I probably subscribe to. And it's like, the tighter you are, the more like centralization and like, for my family, I'm straight communist. I'm like, it's all for the collective. For my community, my extended family, probably pretty socialist. For my neighborhood, I'm probably pretty centrist. And like the further out that I get, I end up at pure anarchy for like, the whole world. And I think we've kind of camped ourselves into these identities of like political type of environments. It's like you can't. I feel like the world is designed for us to hold different opinions based on circumstances and data. And we've camped ourselves into like, no, I'm a socialist. I believe that everyone should be owned by the head and, personal agency should be 0. And that's a phenomenal mindset for like you and your kids and maybe your parents and maybe your sister. But like, that's terrible for a country. And you have to kind of identify which ones are which.
Can you kind of elaborate on your thoughts around Bitcoin being the only kind of like power structure that doesn't really have a human point of failure? It's just this thing. And when you adopt this thing and you contribute to it, you can gain benefit from it. And everyone that does that is incentivized to do more of that, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah, that's really the key thing, is just the aligning incentives portion. You're actually more incentivized to contribute to the security of the Bitcoin network than you are to try to hack it, which again is not really true of any other asset that I can think of. You are much more incentivized to try to social engineer and hack into a bank or hack into a stockbroker or hack into a gold shop. Like, how much money can you really earn? Like, there's this misaligned incentive between a bodyguard and the thing that the bodyguard is guarding, right? Or like the security guard. You give a guy a gun and $30 an hour and you ask him to protect $1 million. It's like, I got to work for a lot of hours, or I can just point this gun the other way and go and grab the $1 million and get a payday. That actually happened in Edmonton like 2 or 3 years ago. There's an armed guard, and they always send 2 of them. And one of the guys, there was just cash on the table, and one of the guys, he just shot the other armed guard and took the money and ran. And this misaligned incentive doesn't happen in Bitcoin because we've removed the human condition. We've removed the morality, the depravity, and the, like naturally evil state of humans. And we've protected it with rules but not rulers. And I think that that's the key. Like you said, you can't blackmail a SHA-256 encryption protocol, but apparently the president of the free world can go ahead and head to an island and he can get all the blackmail he needs. And so it's quite an interesting thing when we look to people to be our saviors, when we look to people to be our protectors, when we look to people to kind of protect our future and guard our future, we run into a bunch of misaligned incentives, and ultimately no one's perfect. And so you end up in this weird spot where you have to kind of either defend this person or you need to find a new person. But when you can root your time in energy, energy is kind of like agnostic. It doesn't really matter. Like energy is just energy. And they're trying to demonize energy, right? It boils the oceans. It's creating hurricanes and like the worst weather pattern since 1964. It's like, sure, all the FUD you want against energy. But at the end of the day, humans, like our time is energy. You literally, like, I'm not sure if you've ever done like a health thing where you stand on the thing and grab the handles. It's like you just by existing burn 1,700 calories, a unit of energy, just by breathing. That's what your body takes just to survive. And you need to fill your body up with 1,700 calories worth of energy, which means somebody has to produce that 1,700 calories worth of energy. And it's like we all boil down at the end of the day to production and consumption of energy. And the fewer objects we have in the way to incentivize negativity or to incentivize thievery and manipulation and all these bad things, the better. I don't think anyone can say anything other than that. And so with that frame of mind, now you have to look and you have to be like, all right, if we want rules and no rulers, because all human rulers are bad, and we need to perfectly preserve energy, what can do that? And I'm like, show me a better asset than Bitcoin to be able to achieve those two things. Because without those two things, I think you're off on the wrong foot already. And those two are the most important things.
Why do you think a lot of people still have so much resistance to something like Bitcoin, arguably a tool that can protect them from the most predatory thing in their lives, which is the manipulated money, which is the most important technology they use every day in their lives? But the same people also talk about freedom, right? Like, I want to be free. I want to be, do whatever I want to do in my life. I want to be, self-sufficient, blah, 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 blah. But they don't adopt Bitcoin. What is that?
Yeah, I think it's a deep condition around kind of what I maybe was talking about earlier around this, like this people honoring or people heroizing other people. And we've kind of camped ourselves into our thoughts and beliefs and ideologies. It's like, I am X, whether it be a political ideology or a Bitcoiner, or even, you attach what you do. I'm a welder. And so, all of my welding friends think this. I am not thinking anything other than that. I'm a high school student. Well, all high school students have cell phones, and so I have to have a cell phone. And from a very young age, we've kind of got this concept of my peers all think this, therefore I think this. And it's not because I've rationally thought it out. It's not because I think it'll make the world a better place. It's simply because somebody else that I trust, rightly or wrongly, thinks this way. And then when somebody points, so then what happens is our ideas become very spiritual. They become very much a part of our soul and our way of thinking, our hearts. They become a part of us. And so when someone comes along and tells us that our ideas or our opinions are wrong or bad for a certain reason, we get this like really adverse reaction. It's like, whoa. No, you don't understand. My hero thinks this. This person that I trust thinks this. And
Mackenzie thinks Bitcoin.
Mackenzie thinks this. No. The governor of my state thinks this. You have no idea. My favorite celebrity thinks this. The hockey player that I like thinks this. My mom thinks this. My best friend thinks this. And it's like, you don't care about the opinion. You just care about who shares the opinion with you because you think it makes you more like them. And it comes from this place of really, truly dramatically overemphasizing humans over like God is like the root of it. But even like if you don't want to get that spiritual, it's this goal to just fit in. And I think that's where it ultimately stems from. And if we are comfortable, like the amount of Sailor simps that I see, that credit to Sailor, I think the treasury space is interesting. And I think it plays a role in our environment, and I'm running a treasury company. So like, we're a productive treasury company. We're different than MSTR, but like, let's call a spade, right? We print shares, buy Bitcoin. Like that's the base of it. And, but the amount of people that are scared to call him out on the things that he could do better, means that they idolize him. And it's not just Sailor, it's literally anyone. And we should feel very comfortable saying, yo, I like that guy. I disagree with A, B, and C. But on the surface, I think this is what I like. And the ability to say, oh, I liked that guy. I'm not talking about anyone in particular, but just in general. I used to like that guy, but this sent me over the edge. Or I got some new data and it changed my opinion here. We're all just like so married to our opinions. We think that we learned something one time and it just is that way forever. And, that's why boomers and Gen X don't adopt Bitcoin. And that's why, we got a hard time believing in new data and truths, like, all the conspiracy theories, like, no. The guy on the TV told me it was this way. How dare you tell me it was a different way? Like, you don't have a TV, and it's like, you don't have a fancy suit. You don't have a microphone. And it's like, we need to kind of slay our heroes and just be in pursuit of a goal and then optimize for finding truth towards that pursuit of a goal.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I have a certain opinion about Sailor, which I think is different than yours. But I also think that is fine, right? Like in general, I think in Bitcoin, people are very critical thinkers, right? And I think people like to have discussions, etc. Right? So
for sure. But I think even like I want to double click on this Sailor thing because I think this is deeply interesting. I bet you and I would agree on facts. We would perhaps, or maybe not, disagree on our like overarching opinion of that fact. And that disagreement, the fact that we can agree on facts, I think, is half the battle. Disagreeing on the opinion just means we have different objectives in mind. And I think that's the whole point, is that we all need and want different objectives, but we have to get to a part where we agree on facts. And if you're walking around here and you think that, let's pick an easy one, the COVID vaccine was in any way a net positive to humanity, like, that's not a fact. That's just like, there are facts that show that to be false. And so I think that we need to get to a spot where we are okay to like zoom out, look at facts without opinions, look at the data, and then take the data in part our objectives to make opinions.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a nice bridge for something else I wanted to ask you. We just mentioned, when you pick Bitcoin as your money, or when you make this conscious decision that you don't want to participate in this debt-fueled money system that is not designed for a better future for you, right? Like that is kind of where the freedom comes from initially, I would say. And I think a lot of people in Bitcoin talk about, the sovereign individual book, or heard people talk about it. And I don't think, again, it's about, chilling on some tropical island or whatever. It's about having mental jurisdiction, like being in control of what you think, what you understand, what you're studying, and eventually what you're doing. But how can people that have this mindset still operate in, a high tax, high surveillance Western country where to connect to what you just said, a lot of people in charge are saying things that they think have value because they are in charge and they are on the TV and they have on a suit, and a lot of people feel that they should follow those people because, well, that's what we've always done. But I think when you start paying attention and start thinking for yourself and trying to be critical also in a way that makes it uncomfortable for you, right? When you start seeing stuff you thought was true, which isn't true, and when you know it isn't true, but the person with the suit and the tie on TV still says it's true, that's super uncomfortable. So maybe you can share a bit how you are approaching that, or how you see other people approaching that, and maybe just your general thought about, if you wake up in a society like that, it doesn't mean your life gets easier.
Yeah, I think everywhere has their problems. Like we're about to go through an insane revolution. I think that you and I are probably going to be on the tail end of our lives when it kind of balances back out. And I hope that Gen Z and Gen A and B and whatever the other generations are called, get to pick it up and kind of rebuild it back better.
For my European friends that want to buy Bitcoin with ease, check out Relay. I've been a longtime fan and happy to partner up with what I think is the best Bitcoin-only platform for Europeans. They offer a super simple, beginner-friendly app with no distractions and no shitcoins. You can do a quick one-time smash buy or set up automatic purchases when you're stacking regularly. And here's the thing that matters most. Relay is 100% self-custody. Every set you hold is yours. Your keys, your coins. If you want to get started, download the app via my link below or in the description and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, at checkout to get 10% off your fees. A huge shout out to Relay for sponsoring the show. Now let's continue.
There is nowhere safe. I mean, even look at El Salvador is a really nice, I think, game or thought experiment where it's we got this guy in charge. He changes the rules in order to benefit society. That's amazing, right? El Salvador has more prosperity now than it ever has had. But we can't ignore the fact that the guy had to change the rules. And if you can change the rules for good, that means that the next guy, or even this guy, can change the rules for bad. I mean, you want to talk, I'm not sure if you and Pastor Coin talked about this, but that's the story of the Bible. God appointed the most godly man to be the first king on the whole earth. And his name was Saul. And he was amazing for decades, maybe not quite decades. And then he falls to pride, corruption, self-indulgence, all these things, and he just corrupts the kingdom. And then so what does God do? He appoints a new king. That's King David. You probably have heard of King David, musician dude. He's like David and Goliath, kills the giants. And same thing. He's got a heart after God, and he's ripping through. God dethrones Saul. David's patient. 10 years after Saul is dethroned, David stands up and becomes king. It's amazing. And then he falls. He has 700 wives or something insane, just immense lust and terribleness. And it's when you put a human being in charge and all that power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so, yeah, if you're in a high tax, high surveillance area, it's what's the trade-off? And you got to start making those decisions with yourself. I'm convinced there is no one right spot to live for everyone because everyone wants different things out of life. For my family and I, I'm a little bit ashamed to say it, but I just love the convenience that Western Canada has for me. It's beautiful. The climate's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's fine. It's I can pretty much order if I need a camera or I need whatever. Electricity is always on. Internet's always here. I can flush my toilet paper. There's modern conveniences here that don't exist in some of the nations that are have less surveillance, less tax, but also less convenience. Would it be better if Canada had less surveillance, less tax? Yeah. And so I'm going to park here and try to fight for that and make that happen through Bitcoin Well, through Get Base, through all the other stuff that, all the efforts that we get to do. But at the end of the day, you got to choose to point your energy to something. And if you're going to point your energy to running from the system, the system probably never changes. If you're going to point your energy to fight the system, you probably lose, but at least you tried.
Well, I think that's an honest reflection, and I think it's also something that a lot of people are thinking about, right? Like, you know, in my country, there's going to be, they have plans to have a 35% unrealized gains tax, where you know people are fighting against that. It's not final yet, but they're you know, I think they're fighting against it, and. Yeah, asking the question, do I still want to stay here, is becoming increasingly relevant, which is incredibly sad.
And you think about why Bitcoin is so important, because like if you've got an asset, you've got a home, if you got a stock portfolio, if you hold MSTR, if you've got any kind of traditional asset in that system, like you are exposed. And legally, you might even be exposed with your Bitcoin. However, you can take your Bitcoin and physically leave with it. And I think that's the difference. You'd be a delinquent, and you'd be subject to fines and criminal charges in your country and all this stuff, but you'd be out. And I think that in a draconian world, you got to stop thinking about the arbitrary rules that the human beings have put upon us and start thinking about the laws of physics. And if your country decides that a 35% unrealized gains tax is the best way to treat its citizens, then you're exposed to selling the stuff before you get, like, or you have to abandon it, which sucks. Like, that's 100% tax. So that's like not good. You have to play the game, which also sucks, or you have to pick up your assets and leave. And we are locking ourselves inside of all kinds of assets that don't allow you to pick up and leave. And like, you know, crypto broadly is one of them. Bitcoin not in self-custody is one of them. One of the only assets that you can actually pick up and leave with is just real Bitcoin sitting in self-custody.
What does it mean when Bitcoin gets boring? Is that a good thing, or is that a dangerous thing? We see, you know, with this whole, you know, Epstein stuff, where the price is going down. You know, I see a lot of uninformed people that have never researched or talked about Bitcoin before, but they do have a big audience, you know, saying all kinds of things about it. Incredibly uninformed. I do think that is dangerous, in a sense that, you know, every asset, every development, whatever, has a certain narrative or idea around it, right? So it's in that sense always, how do you say that? Like, you know, the perception is malleable forever, basically. But yeah, when Bitcoin becomes more boring, like, is that a good thing, a bad thing? What do you mean by that?
I think it's probably neither. I think that I'm a dopamine junkie, so I definitely like exciting Bitcoin. I like the green candles and the red candles, and, you know, work is always more chaotic. I'm a chaos maxi, so it's like, you know, but I think philosophically speaking, like, we don't want our money to be exciting. We don't want to be beholden to like the fact that there's even currency markets to play and Forex markets, and like, you know, we have to gamble our hard-earned and saved money just to survive. That's a problem. And I think when we have boring Bitcoin, you and I are never going to experience pure boring Bitcoin. But if you watch Tomer, do you know who Tomer is? You watch his video about like the prosperity that is Bitcoin. I forget what the title's called, but it's
Bitcoin is beautiful.
Is it that one, or is it Bitcoin is Generational Wealth? I think is
yeah. By the way, for people listening, look up those two. Bitcoin is beautiful and Bitcoin is Generational Wealth.
Oh, it's fantastic. Tomer and I are sitting down next week to have him on the Adam O'Brien show, which I'm super pumped on. But I really can't help shake the feeling that in 100 years, the total market cap of Bitcoin will be equivalent to what humans can produce. And like really everything else is a consumable. And to Jeff Booth's point, everything falls to the price of production. And I think that we won't see that, but that is the Bitcoin promise. And you want to know how boring Bitcoin's going to be when the price of Bitcoin can only move because human beings have innovated and produced? that's going to be boring because it'll be real innovation at that point. It won't be fake fairy dollars that have been airdropped in from some executive order. It's going to be actual value driving the conversation, real money, human energy driving the value of your money. And when that happens, we're going to see and find out real quick how valuable people think climate initiatives are and how valuable people think, all these nonsense government initiatives, like all the virtue signaling stops real quick when it's coming out of your direct pocket. And I think that's probably where the world starts to prosper and thrive.
What I like about Bitcoin is that this proof of work is in everything. Like you said, if you see someone talk and not walking the walk, it's fucking bullshit, right? Like
100%.
it is, when you know that there is something else that exists that incentivizes you to walk your talk, basically, right? Like once you know that exists, that is why Bitcoin is this mirror idea, right? You can uphold that kind of like level of what you expect for other people to do. So I don't really know where I wanted to go on which direction, but it's just so fascinating that the proof of work part comes back in everything, and it's only because we know that there is something like proof of work, right? We could actually argue that. The people with the suit on TV, that is proof of stake. It's look at me, I'm sitting in this chair, I have this title, and therefore, and therefore, what I say is true or has value. And that is pure nonsense because that is not the only option. It doesn't make sense that is the only option for us.
No, of course not, man. And I think, again, it's like slaying the hero, right? It's fine to take different tidbits from what people say. Like, listen, like it's the only way to communicate is by listening to other people. That's really the only way to learn. Whether it's in written form or it's in verbal form, you cannot learn unless you listen to other people. But we have to kind of decouple this idea that people are the things they can teach you. And you can love what somebody says without loving that person. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make. Like I call people all the time, like if I'm going to disappoint you, like if you're looking at me as some idol or some perfect being, I'm going to disappoint you. It's fine to listen to what I say and take it for what it's worth. But me and the man on the TV and the person you elect and, everyone, you just cannot have your personal being locked in that kind of a hero because it'll fail you time and time again.
Yeah, I fully agree. So to wrap up, two questions. If someone is listening and still feels, like someone our age, a millennial, and they feel or they start seeing that they are a slave to a lender right now, and that kind of that path is something that doesn't excite them toward the future, but they have no Bitcoin or a little Bitcoin. How do they start? Like, how do you start becoming, the rebel or the rebellion against your old self or something like that? Like, how should people start? Like, what's a practical tip or guidance you would give to people?
Yeah, I think you start with your habits. Forget, like, the last step is buying Bitcoin. You gotta right size your heart and your habits before owning Bitcoin is going to mean anything to you. If you own Bitcoin and it 10x's in price, right? We go from here to 100K because that's what's, or to $1 million because that's what it's going to do. But you haven't right sized your heart and your reasons and your time preference, then you're going to sell that Bitcoin to buy something dumb. Like 10 years ago, I put away one Bitcoin and I was like, when this Bitcoin can buy me a McLaren 720S, I am here for it. I got my one UTXO. I'm like, it's locked away. It's protected. I'm ready. And today, that one Bitcoin is like earmarked for my grandkids. And I think that mindset shift is just so important to realize. You don't really need a 720S, right? You don't really need a new house or like this, fancy updated whatever. It's like you need generational wealth. And so step one is to find a path to build those habits, whether it's spending within your means, right? Forget paying off your debt. How do you just start living without consumer debt? Just start there. Can you go on a cash diet and still save money? If so, great. You can probably pay down the debt that you already have. Once your debt is paid down, you're going to have such a good control over your impulses. You're going to be so financially disciplined that you're going to be able to accumulate Bitcoin at an alarming rate, and you won't blow it the second it's green. And I think that three-stepped approach is probably like one of the most important things that we can highlight. Is just, you don't get generationally wealthy by accident. You get it through discipline and a strong mindset, understanding what that means. And that's probably where most people go wrong, is they think they do all the right things, but they do it without the change of heart, so to speak. And I think that's where people get caught.
Awesome. I love that. My last question, and I ask everyone the same question, which is, what is a core belief that you will never let go of?
Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior of our universe. It's tough. It's tough to ignore the apologetics. That's got nothing to do with Bitcoin. But I do have a presentation that I call Jesus is a Bitcoiner. And I think that, if I want to write this down, I actually think that your journey, your Bitcoin journey, has three phases. It's kind of got this pre-Bitcoiner phase, it's got this Bitcoiner phase, and then it's got like this Jesus maxi phase. And I think that Bitcoin ultimately leads you towards objective truth, and it is so difficult to ignore the objective truth of Jesus Christ.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing, and thanks for your time. And let's stay in touch.
Looking forward to it, Bram. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, if you want to help me shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, please like this video and subscribe to stay connected. I hope to see you for our next episode.